as I said, what we'll focus on is we'll just kind of review what was involved in getting project part 2, A, B, and C done and in the solution, because that might have some relevance for some parts of the test. Okay. All right. So in terms of the A part here, this was really focused on one view, right? The musician index view, adding filtering, sorting, paging. Yeah, sure. Yeah, we did the same sort of thing to the index view of the instrument as well, but not nearly to the extent we did with musician, right? We wanted to add quite a bit of options for filtering, okay, with a drop-down list for the primary instrument that a musician plays, any other instrument that they might play, as well as, of course, things like the characters and the name of the musician, characters anywhere in their phone number, and then we'll be able to apply our filter. We did go to the extent of, in our demonstrations, I didn't insist on it, of having the filter section disappear if you're not using it and reappear. That's in the posted solution, right? Now add sorting. Okay, we have 4 columns basically to sort by. I'll show you how I decided to rearrange the actual information in the index just to limit it to 4 columns anyway, right? The other big aspect, along with filtering and sorting, is paging. And then, of course, we made efforts to tie it all together and persist the current filter, sort, and page parameters, right? So that we could navigate away and come back again where we left off. That's so important to end users these days, to be able to, apply a filter and come back and not have to go through the pain in the rear end aspect of getting it all set up over again, right? So that's what we're going to review. We'll start off reviewing Project 2A. This is the one will probably take the most time. I think I have it up and running. So let's just see how it's actually functioning first, and then we'll get into the code. So here is what I did in my solution that I posted then. So you notice I combined this whole aspect of the primary instrument and the other instruments that a musician plays into a single column this way, so that we could always show the primary instrument first. And that's required, right? Remember, that is a required foreign key, so there's not an option to sort of leave that blank. So we can count on always having data to show there. And then there may be no other instruments, okay, played beside the primary one. Or if there are other ones, I took advantage of the fact that we can collapse and expand, right, to take less screen real estate. Again, we're always going to use 2 rows basically by having this arrangement. But I think that's worthwhile. It gets rid of the extra column and, maybe some confusion there. Hopefully, if your client didn't like an approach that you've taken, like I've done here, what you can do is get their feedback and go back and rearrange it to make sure that your client is happy. So I'll tell you right now, if enough students say they don't like this, I will go into my solution, my published solution, and make that change. But I think it's a reasonable approach. And besides, my goal as your instructor is just to show you a variety of different approaches that you can implement going forward, right? Okay, so the other aspect here is we have our filter search button, and once you get used to it, it's pretty easy to find. Then we have our paging nav bar down here at the bottom. Now there's all kinds of other ways you can arrange it, okay? And if you don't like the little icons I'm using, you don't have to use them. In this jump forward business, we went through all that before, but we can click, we can change the page size, I can take it down to 3, and so on and so forth, right? Okay, in terms of the filter, as I said, we can filter by the primary instrument. So if we just want to see people who, a lead vocal is their primary instrument, then there we are. Okay, now we still have 4 pages of data because we're only showing 3 per page. If I put that up to 10 per page, right, then we have a lot fewer pages, just 2 pages does the whole job, right? Okay, and the other point is, okay, we have a filter applied. Maybe I want to sort it alphabetically or numerically by age. Okay, in reverse order, right? And then I can go to page 2. And so here my youngest musician, okay, who has lead vocals as their primary instrument is 17 years old. I can go to the details of this particular musician. And when I finish looking at all the details here, when I go back, right, the key thing here, notice as I hover over in the bottom left corner, you can see all the parameters that have been added to this link. Okay, then I'm going to go back with the sort direction set a certain way, that the sort field is age and so on and so forth, and we're on page 2, right? So not surprisingly, I come back to the index exactly the way we left it. And that was the real point of tying all three of these aspects, sort, filter, and paging, together into a single operation. And of course, we can just clear, and that clears everything. All the parameters are gone, and we're back to as we first loaded. Now, the only thing that is kind of persistent here is our page size, right? The fact that we wanted 10 per page or whatever, okay, that doesn't get cleared, but that's in a cookie. It eventually would clear, because I think the cookie's set for, 30 minutes or something, but it's not cleared with the clear button, just the sorting and filtering is. All right, so yeah, we can work all that functionality. So let's go into how we accomplish all this functionality and tied it in as well, okay, with these options here, that we can go to any of the other views and come back again to the same index the way it was set up. All right. So that's what we had to do, right? We achieved all of this functionality. So let's have a look in the code and just kind of, we're not going to hash out every detail again, but I'll try to hit the highlights, right, as we go through here, right? So in terms of the controller, right, we end up with quite a few parameters because we need one for each and every filter, okay? Things like the name, the phone number, the foreign keys for the instrument, the other instrument ID, right? And then, of course, these are the ones related to paging. We need to know the page size, right? The action button is which button we clicked. Now that is key, because if we're just clicking any of the column headings, which become action buttons, or the apply filter button, we need to know which of those caused us to come back in here to our actual index action, right? And then for the sorting, we need to track the sort direction and the sort field, right? Okay, so those are all the parameters that we add to the index itself. Now, this is a key point here that I really want to emphasize. When we define this array, the string array, okay, these strings must match the actual names that we've given here, right, to the column headings, that the ones that we want to be able to click on as an action button, as a link to actually sort by these different columns. So this literal musician, phone, instruments with an S at the end, that must exactly match the values we put here. If there's any critical step, okay, in this process that is totally up to you, that it is your responsibility completely, it's that you have to make sure these exactly match. So, if later on, your client says, no, I don't like it to say instruments. I want to change the verbiage here a little bit or something. Or instead of age, I don't want to say age. I want to say something else. I don't know. Whatever that might be, right? Well, whatever changes are made to the literal values of these buttons at the column headings, you have to make sure that you also, because it's 100% your responsibility to come in here and maintain the same value here. But as long as you do that, the system works. Okay, so I just want to emphasize, because that is so important, because that is entirely your responsibility to maintain that yourself. Okay, all right. Then we set a few defaults here. Our class for the display of our filter section. Okay, I'm going to set here to button outline secondary. That's for the actual button itself. Right, we'll initially assume our number of things we're filtering by is 0, because remember, we can apply multiple filters, right? And then, of course, we just have to prepare data for use in the screen, our different drop-down lists, okay? Now, it just so happens that our drop-down list for the other instruments is the same list of instruments, right, that we already have in our view data for instrument ID, right? So we just are basically copying it over here. We don't need a separate link query. We can take advantage of the fact that the popular drop-down list prepared this one over here, right? Okay, then we get the initial definition of the query in place. Notice that it is an iQueryable, meaning we can easily add as many where clauses to it as we want, an order by clause, etc., before we actually call it to execute. That's the key to this whole approach. Then we just check for filters, okay? If any of these parameters we pass in has a value, then we're going to add, and we can add multiple ones, additional where clauses. So we take the iQueryable as we've defined it, add our where clause for the primary key, for now here's, of course, because it's a many-to-many relationship, our other instrument ID, okay, we use the .any operator. That's something we talked about earlier, right? The plays.any. So if we have any record where this many-to-many relationship, there's a corresponding value across relationship for another instrument, that is then added to our filter. Searching the name, I've taken that lazy approach, what I think is valid. Nonetheless, if you really have a client that insists on searching the middle name for the letter, you can do that as well, but I just normally do the last and first name. Okay, again, using this very simple approach of converting everything to uppercase, so there's no question or possibility of confusion in terms of upper and lowercase characters, right, that we search for the uppercase versions contained anywhere inside the last name and first name accordingly, with an or operator in between, right? And then pretty much the same thing for phone number. Since our phone number is actually a character string, not a true number, then that does the job. Again, notice that, remember, we set our count of how many filters there were to 0. So as we go through all these separate ifs, right, we increment that by 1 for every one that we're actually adding a filter. So in theory, we could end up with 4 different things we're filtering by, right, by the time we're done. So that's where this comes into place, right? We check if we actually are filtering at all. If number of filters is not equal to 0, then we know that we have applied at least one filter. So we're going to do a few things. We're going to change that class for the button itself to button danger, so it goes nice and bright and red on the screen, drawing your attention to it. Okay. We'll actually add a comment here that the X number of filters are being applied, right? And then finally, we want to keep the bootstrap collapse, because that's what's happening. When we click the button, it expands this bootstrap collapse to show the filter section, right? So we want to keep it open, and we do that by this little class that we're adding to the class saying show, right? And that's all done there. So actually, before I go on, let's go over to the index, up to the section we're talking about here, right? So here is where the button itself has this class, right? So that's where it'll be either red or just that outline, okay? After the actual label here, filter/search, that's where we're going to show that comment about how many filters are applied. And then the div itself that we collapse, okay, here's where it will have the word show if we want it to be open, right? Otherwise, by default, it collapses. And that's how we keep it open, so it's visible as long as any filter is being applied. And that's all there is to it. Now, this is straightforward stuff we've gone over before. I'm not going to take much time. We have our drop-down list for our primary instrument, other instrument, our phone number, our name, characters, and the name we're going to search by, and of course our actual action button, right, to actually apply the filter itself. Okay. All right. And then our column headings, each one is an action button where the value is one of those absolutely engraved in stone, right? You get the idea. Firmly fixed value that is in our string array of values to look for action buttons to know which one we're sorting by. And that's it. The fact that the whole thing is in a form, right, does the rest of the work, including right down to the bottom. And of course, our paging nav bar must also be inside the form itself. And that's where the paging nav bar, let's just remind ourselves what's going on in there. It's in our shared filter here. So basically, oh, by the way, I threw this in. I don't have it in my copy paste file, but it's handy to have here. It's not even in the posted solution. I just was preparing. You can see why I didn't even do any spell checking here. To keep it at the bottom of the screen, we can add this inside the nav, add that class in here, and that's all you really need to do to change the look of it, right? Okay, so if we don't have any data, okay, so our total pages is 0, right, then we would show that. If we have one page, then we just show page 1 of, and away we go. If we have more than one, then we've gone through this before, we just set up our jump amount depending on how many pages we have and so on and so forth. That's it. And we have our buttons to show. So if you really don't like the look, okay, of the characters I'm using, feel free to change them. Okay, I don't have any problem with that whatsoever. Just, customize it to your heart's content. All right, so I maybe will show you one thing before I leave this part of the assignment. Feel free to put up any questions in the chat window while I'm just starting up the execution of the application here again. If you have any questions about the sorting, filtering, and paging. Okay, coming back here once more, right? So if I have, as I say here, something I'm filtering by, right, then this will stay open. It shows one filter applied. If I look for the letter E, it'll still be, I'm 2 filters applied now, right? And away we go. So we're down to 2 pages and so on as well with 2 filters applied. And I can have a sort order at the same time. And that's fine. But what I want to point out is here the nav bar at the bottom, right? If I change this to I don't know, 30. Well, right, then it kind of goes off the screen. Now, if I take out, I can just delete here and apply, right? No, I didn't get that more. If this is the one that's doing, let me put the E back. Okay, then I have a lot more data here, right? So is it a pain to come all the way down to the bottom to get to the scroll bar? Yeah, it's a little bit, right? So that's where that other option is available if I want. Let's see if I can do this. No, I think I have to stop it, but I can just put this class back in here. Put that right in the nav itself. Now it should, because it's in the cookie, it should remember my page size for me. When I come here, right now, I can scroll up and down, but I always see my the paging navigation bar here at the bottom. It's always available no matter what, right? The only thing is, some reason why you might not like this is, depending on your window size, it can easily go off the bottom that way, but it's entirely up to you and your client whether you like the one or the other approach. But it's very, very easy to switch back and forth between them. Okay, now the other thing I didn't cover is, of course, how it remembers, right? So I can go off and come back to the page. Well, remember, it really is the fact that it is a cognizant controller, but not only that, an elephant controller, which inherits from cognizant controller, and basically uses my maintain URL, right, to actually store basically the URL we're leaving as we go to, say, edit or details or delete, so that we can actually come back and pull that URL out of the cookie and get it back in place so that we actually have that memory. Does anyone need me to go over any more detail on any of that? Okay. All right, well, let's just carry on then. Now, on the instrument index view, we said we want to add paging, right? Always sorted by the instrument name, and we don't need any filters, right? So it was actually a much simpler implementation here for the instrument. So let me just clean the screen a little bit here. Okay, so for the instrument controller, much simpler. The only two parameters we need is for the page and the page size ID, okay? We do our query with all the information we need, but make sure it's an queryable. The ASNO tracking helps take care of that for us. And all we have to do is handle our paging, right? So we get our page size, okay, storing the value here in our view data, and then we just return the page data as we go through, right? So very, very simple. And all we had to do in the index, make sure we actually have it inside of a form, right? That's basically all there is. And then before the closing tag of the form, that's where we add our paging nav bar, right? So there's no column headings that are, buttons or links or anything like that. So actually very, very simple to implement that last part of 2A, just adding the ability to have paging on the instrument. And because we set up the controller to inherit again from our elephant controller, we already have, okay, all the paging that we need. So if I'm going to put it down, so just I can see lots of pages, right? So now I see I have 3 pages of instruments, and away you go. I'm always sorting alphabetically by the instrument name. Probably 5 would be a little bit more appropriate, right? Now, again, because we're inheriting the same nav bar, notice it's set up again to always be at the bottom of the screen. If you want it right below the data, just take out that one class and away you go. Now, I didn't insist on this. I did it in my own, but I separately have this expandable list of all the musicians that have the primary instrument, lead guitar. And these are all the musicians that have it simply as one of their other things that they play. It's not necessarily their primary, but it is one of the other things that they play as well, right? Okay. All right, so let me go back to the instructions again. So that was it for 2A. Any questions about 2A? All right, let's carry on then. If I go to 2B or not, get it? Or not 2B? Okay, I'm sorry. I'm in one of those moods today, I guess. All right. Here's a chance to work with this additional implementation of a many-to-many. Now, in our medical office, I used 2 separate many-to-manys to demonstrate these 2 techniques. But what I thought is, hey, before we get complicated adding more and more entities, the truth is that this is a situation where the same many-to-many relationship has sort of a bias, right? There are not nearly as many instruments as there are musicians, right? So here's a chance that from the musician point of view, it makes sense that we could just use a small grouping of checkboxes on the screen to indicate, okay, I play this one, and this one, right? These are all the instruments that I know how to play, right? Simple, because there's only going to be a handful of instruments in total. So that's why our checkbox approach that we did earlier worked perfectly fine, right? In terms of the many-to-many of how many instruments that we play, right, from the musician point of view. But if we turn it around, if we say for a given instrument, how many musicians play this instrument? Now, again, we're leaving out the primary instrument relationship altogether. We're just talking about the many-to-many, which I know was a little confusing for a few students at first, but I tried to help them understand, and I think most people did quite well, right, from what I've seen so far. Okay, so from the instrument point of view, no, to try to use checkboxes would be unmanageable, completely unmanageable, because there's just way too many musicians, right, in the system. So it's a perfect time then to say, no, we need to use that other approach that we learned about. Why not have 2 lists where we can just move, in this case, musicians back and forth between the 2 list boxes to say who can actually edit it and who can't, right? So that's what we were asked to do, is to use 2 list boxes, select all the musicians can play the instrument, okay, in both the create and edit operations, right? In the details view, we'll show, okay, all. Now, I also threw it on the index, as you just saw. That wasn't a requirement. And in fact, you might not even want it there, but I thought I'd show that you can put it there in the posted solution, right? So we want to have separate lists of all the musicians that have it as their primary instrument, because remember, we're always focused here on the instrument, right? And then, of course, the ones that have it as one of their other instruments, right? It might be both, because we haven't put any restriction to say it can't be, but that's another issue altogether. So let's just look at how that is done. Am I running right now? Yes, I am. So let me bring it up in the browser, okay? So here, again, if I go to edit or create, right, then what do we see? We see the list of all the values, all the musicians who currently have specified, yes, I play lead guitar, right? And then those that don't, okay, are over here. Other musicians who play, and then we can choose musicians. So, you know, oops, accidentally, Betty Cockburn here, no, she doesn't play lead guitar. So let's take her back out, move her over into that list. And when I click save, okay, all the data gets saved. And I should have shown you that she was there before, but now she's not, right? Again, in details, we have the 2 separate lists here. So I'll do another one. So we can see that Wilma Smith, okay, is a primary, but in terms of other, for lead guitar, right now, Fred Blogs, okay, Fred R. Blogs is in that list. So if I come back to edit, Fred R. Blogs, we'll take Fred out, save that. Let's go back to details for lead guitar, and no longer anywhere in this list will we see Fred R. Blogs, right? So we are successfully maintaining that information, right? So that works in the create when we're creating a new instrument. My new instrument is going to be terrible. What suggestions? I don't know. Think of an instrument. Juice. Harp. You know, a little twang, twang, twang in the mouth. And who plays it? Well, Fred Blogs definitely plays it, and Wilma. Okay, they learn together. So I'll just click create. So there we are. So if I come to my, there it is, Juice Harp, because it's alphabetically by the name. Nobody has it as their primary instrument, but we do see the 2 musicians here. I could go in and edit. Let's add a third musician, and away we go. Okay, so that was the actual first part of the 2B, was to get that functionality in place. Just to look in the code quickly at that, then let me just close that. In the instrument controller, what was involved here? Well, it's mostly, again, when we go Control-MO, shrink everything down. Okay, let's deal with the create process, right? So one thing we had to do, we had to get the populate, okay, plays instrument data, right? So if I right click, I can say go to definition, right? So this is the code we added here that we go and we get all the musicians, so that we'll have all of them available. Then we check, okay, currently in the data, go to the instrument, check the plays collection, that's that associative or intersection entity, right? And then we select all the musicians that actually currently right now play this particular instrument according to the data itself. And then we prepare our two lists, okay, of our list option view model objects, the ones that are currently selected to play this already, and all the ones who are available, right? And then as we go through, consider each and every musician, we slot them in with a list option view model in either one or the other, right? Okay, then we either add them to selected or available, depending on whether they already have that or not. And that just prepares our two our select lists and our availables, right? Our multi-select lists to display in the data. So let's go, for consistency, we'll go to the create view. And down here is where we have our two, okay, list boxes, okay, the selected options and the available options, and that's where it gets the data from the view bag corresponding to whether we added them here or here. And that's as simple as that, to get the data up on the screen. By the time, of course, we finish moving them back and forth, we do have this little script here that makes sure that when we click our submit button, remember, we had to make sure we had the ID button submit in here, because that script looks for that, grabs the click event, and then make sure that we highlight all the ones in the selected so they come over to, when we do our post for the create, we have our selected options, right? And that comes in here, so all the musicians that were in that list come in, and what we do is we call our update plays, okay, for all the ones that were in the selected list, okay, for this given instrument. So if I come now, I'm trying to right click, go to definition of update plays. So we have our list. These are all the ones that are in the selected list, all the musicians and the instrument to update. And it's just a matter of going through and then making sure that the appropriate records are actually added, okay, to our instrument itself, right? So again, the easy thing is, hey, if we have an empty list, then all we don't have to worry about any old values. We just create a new empty list and assign that to the plays property. That's that collection inside the actual instrument class itself. And then when it saves it, okay, any that were there will be removed, right? Otherwise, we have to go through and make sure we have the right ones in here. So we have the selected IDs, the current IDs, and then it's a matter of going through, again, all the musicians and then making sure we either add it or remove it as necessary going through the list. And that's basically everything that needs to be done. And it was very much similar for the edit process. Of course, the difference is there will be existing values, right, possibly when you go to edit, whereas when you're creating, you're starting with a blank slate, right? But that's the only real difference. So let's go back up in the controller here to the actual create the edit process. So again, we just prepare, populate, plays instrument data, and this works because, of course, the instrument, we included the play data, right? So when we pass it here, it already knows what musicians currently are down in our database for playing this instrument, right? And then it populates it accordingly, the data in the two list boxes. And then after we're finished editing, we get our selected options here. Okay. Oh, I just need to admit somebody. There we go. All right. Okay. So trick then is to call our update plays, right? And we do that before we check for validation, because if there's a validation issue in terms of our try update model, right? And we end up having to redisplay the data, because maybe they left something out or took out the instrument name or something like that. There isn't much to go wrong, I confess, but if for some reason it fails this try update model, right, then we want to make sure that we redisplay the data back to the user the way they last left it, right? So that's why it's important to do this first before any of our other validation checks. And of course, same thing if there's from the database, if there's any concurrency error, or of course, we know why this retry limit exception is here. Whenever you have a hierarchical arrangement of data, in other words, our instrument update has child collections of data, for example, who plays the instrument, it's going to be done as a big transaction, and therefore we might end up having to roll back, right? Because the retry limit, it'll try X number of times, I think it's 5 times, and then if it doesn't succeed in putting the whole transaction through, that's where you'll get this exception, unable to save changes after multiple attempts, right? Okay, so one reason or another, we might be redisplaying the view, in which case we want to make sure we populate the plays instrument data so it goes back according to what we already updated then in our instrument update, even though we weren't able to save it to the database yet. And that pretty much completes the process. So, oh boy, we're taking some time to go through, but maybe it's worthwhile. I hope you're finding it worthwhile to review the posted solution and see everything there. Finally, auditing and concurrency control. Actually, it's amazing how simple it is to get the auditing in place, isn't it, right? Okay, so really, coming back to the project, it was just a matter of here in our models, right? First we defined the iAudible interface, okay, and then we implemented it here, okay, in the Audible class. And you'll notice in my posted solution, I only asked for it in the instructions. I only asked for it for the musician. But you'll notice that I've gone ahead and I've added it to a whole bunch, okay? In fact, you'll see that just about everything except the simple intersection entities are now all auditable, right? So our genre is audible, the album is auditable, musician is audible, of course. Now, performance is audible, but play is not, right? There's no point in trying to have it here. Song is auditable. Of course, a lot of these entities only come in the C part, but I wanted to point out that I made them all auditable. And one reason I did that is because when I publish up to Azure, I don't want to have somebody come along and delete all the data out of the database. So if I could get here, let me just show here. If you just add this, okay, in where we check the entity state in our Audible class, the simple case, right? I can check the created by if they want to delete a record, but if it was created by seed data, then I can throw a DB update exception, right? Now, of course, I want to add a little bit of code in my controllers to handle this specific exception to give the proper feedback to the user, right? But that's all it takes then. If I make everything auditable, okay, everything important auditable, then it means it prevents you from deleting the originally seeded data. Go ahead, add your own data, your own sample data, so to speak, your test data, and you can delete it. But this prevents you from deleting my seeded data. So that's why one reason I tend to make almost everything auditable. But you know what, in the real world, why wouldn't you want to audit who last edited, just about everything in your system, right? The only thing you were required to do, let me emphasize again, was the musician. You had to make musician auditable, right? But then all the rest of the work for auditing is simple, right? It all goes in here in our context. Okay, there's some bit of work. We had to, of course, make the HTTP context accessor available. That was done in the actual program.cs class, and that allowed us to have this constructor where we get it in place, right? We can grab the username if the user's logged in. If not, we'll just go with unknown, okay? And of course, if there's no HTTP context, so we're seeding data, the username would just be seed data. That's how I get that stored in all the values when we initially seed data, right? And then it's not here, it's down below. In both save changes and save changes async, we call our on before saving. And that's where we can, depending if it's modified or added, or as I said, if I add this as well, this case, is deleted, I can raise an exception if it's seed data, and that prevents me actually deleting seeded data, right? So really, auditing is almost a no-brainer. You get that in place and you're done. Of course, you want to make sure you drop the database and make sure you create migrations appropriate and so on and so forth. But the bottom line is here, let me just bring up for a second. If I get my SQLite compact toolbox up and going, right? Let me just make sure we're connected to the right music collection here. And if I go into any of the tables, for example, musician, let's peek at the data here, edit top 200 rows. Okay, you'll see the created by, created on, right? Updated by, updated on values here. And of course, they mostly say seed data. Now, if I do an actual edit, for example, then it will actually get a new updated on date, and the updated by would be unknown. It'll be unknown only because at this point in time, I'm not logged in. But very soon, okay, I promise we will get to it. Very soon, we'll be adding logins, right? And once you're actually forced to log into the system, then we'll know who you are, and our system will automatically take advantage of that. And the updated by and the created by, if you create a record, right, will actually have your user log in here, right? So we'll know who to blame, so to speak, for creating and or updating records, and away we go. Okay. All right. So that's enough about the auditing. Let's get to the concurrency control. For that, you were asked to do it for, again, which model was it? The musician, right? So what we did is we added, way down here, our row version. Okay. Now, we had this discussion when we introduced the topic of auditing. If, okay, every class that you're going to make auditable, you also want to add concurrency. You could put that property, that row version property, right in the auditable class. Okay, I have done that in the past, right? But we don't want to go to that extent. I don't need to worry about adding triggers for every single one of the classes that I want auditing, right? So that's why I'm going to do it in this case right in the musician. I'm going to add the row version directly into any class where I'm going to implement the actual concurrency control. Now, the other thing for that, we need triggers because unlike beautiful SQL Server, okay, it is true that we don't have automatic support for our row version, right? But all it is just a matter of coming in here then and do it in this region where we prepare the database, right? So after we've created the database, we're going to create the necessary triggers. So this is what you needed in your code, right? So for the musician, okay, we're going to set the timestamp on update and exactly the same thing on insert, basically. So after update, remember, we learned triggers together last term, right? We learned how to do triggers, and it's very much the same in SQLite. So after update on musicians, okay, because that's the name of the actual table in the database. It corresponds to the name of the DB set, right? Update musicians, set our row version. Now, of course, we don't have super fancy row versioning type like we do in SQL, but we can just create a random blob, okay? A binary large object, okay? And that will be where the row ID matches a new row ID, right? And away we go. So the same thing for on insert as update, right? We basically create a new random timestamp or row version value. So as long as these triggers get created as we create the database, then we will be maintaining the data. Now, I have gone around the room and helped some students that had everything in place, but they had never actually dropped the database and recreated it yet, right? So they didn't actually create their triggers. Let me point out here, using our toolbox, okay, you can come into the table and look at here, right? For the table itself, you can see whether or not, so if I come here to musicians table, look at that, triggers. So I can see that the triggers actually have been created, right? So that's a way to check to see if you actually have your triggers in place. If everything is in place, but you're not getting actual concurrency control being enforced, it's because you didn't actually create your triggers. So you can check it yourself that way. All right, so because the triggers are in place, let's, I'm going to clean up the screen here a little bit. I'm going to close all the tabs. Yeah, sure, why not? Let's come over to our controllers, come to the musician controller. That's the only one that you were asked to do concurrency on, and you were only asked to do it on the edit process, right? So here in edit, what did we do? Well, a couple things. I should point out as well that in the actual view, so when we come down to views, musician edit, very important, we added a hidden input, okay? We need to store the row version. So remember, we go and we get the record from the database, our musician record, right? It is displayed in this view. And as we pass down our musician model to the view, we're going to store the row version. So this is the timestamp or row version of the record as we pulled it from the database. Very, very important that it's stored in the view itself, right? Okay, so then after we do an edit and we post back the result of doing that edit to the edit post, right, we get that row version back. So then we go and we get the copy from the database of the musician we want to update, right, including the play information that so we can support the many-to-many, right? Our quick check, if the musician, we got the record. If it's null, that means somebody deleted it, okay? That's one issue, okay? Of course, we update all our plays, but that's nothing to do with concurrency. Here, this is critical for concurrency. Because we pulled it from the database and we didn't have as-no tracking, right? Notice that's not part of the link query here, right? So we do have the change tracker functional on this particular object that we pulled from the database. So with the change tracking in place, there are a whole set of what we call original values to every property of the object itself, right? So we want to make sure the original value is the same as what we stored in the view. So that's why we have to get that row version from the hidden input here in the view itself, right? And we assign that to the original value here. Why is that important? It's important because if we just pull it from the database, the original value would be probably the same as the current value, right? Because we just got it from the database. So we have to tell it, no. Here is the row version or timestamp that we want to compare to. So that's a critical step that we must do. And that's all we really have to do, because when we save changes, okay, it will notice that the row version has changed. Why? Because right back here in the musician class, we decorated that property as timestamp. So Entity Framework Core will know to compare. If this value, this timestamp value, this row version has been modified, if it's not exactly the same, then will be flagged as a concurrency error. And so in our controller, it will be a DB update concurrency exception, right? So that exception comes in here and it has tons of information we can take advantage of, right? So we get the exception entry. We've gone through this before. I won't bore you by going through the whole thing again. The point is we'll end up having our client values and then eventually the database values, right? Okay, now of course if it was deleted, then we can just say unable to save changes, the musician was deleted. But if it wasn't deleted, something has changed, right? So that's where we can write this very verbose code here, comparing the database value and the client value for each and every property that we have access to, right? So we can give detailed feedback to the user. So there's some customization to make this work for the particular entity we have. We have a first name, a middle name, a last name, a SIN number, a date of birth, right? Notice we can take advantage here that we can do some nice formatting of the date of birth to show it in a nice user-friendly way without the millisecond showing and things like that, right? Same with the phone number. We can show the formatted version of the phone number and away we go. For the foreign key, we actually have to do a little bit of extra work here, do a link query to go get the proper value to display and so on, with a nice summary up at the top saying the record you attempted to edit, et cetera, right? Now here's a little trick then, right? By setting the row version of musician update, okay, to the database value row version, then if they click save again, right, it will actually overwrite the record. Right? So we don't actually have to make them go through the whole process. They can say, yep, and we explain that here in the comment. If you still want to save your version, just click the save button. And because we lied, because we set the row version property of the musician to update, okay, to the one from the database, that means that it will now be synchronized unless somebody in the meantime has come along and made another edit, right? But if no one else has touched the record since, then we will actually be updating it so that the next time it won't see a difference in the row version. right? Now we do also have to remove the error from our model state for the row version, and that allows us to carry on. And that's it. So that allows us to do it. We're almost out of time. I'm sorry. Here I'm taking too long. Well, yeah, I tell you what, I'll skip it. I won't bother demonstrating it. You know that it works. You can test it yourself. Okay. Oh, this protection for underage children, 7 years old. Well, that's a lot of marks I gave you for that. Sorry, let me just stop that. It was one or two lines of code is all you had to add. In the musician class itself, just in the iValidatable object down here, if you were clever, you recognize the fact that we've already calculated the age. It's a built-in property of the class. So if age is less than 7, okay. Now, if you did it yourself, did the calculation, I did not take off marks, right? I gave you full marks nonetheless, but away you go, right? So this was the easy way because we've already done the work calculating the age, so we could just add the validation result there. Musician must be at least 7 years old. Bada bing, bada boom, show it by date of birth, right? So that was the end of the B part. Okay, to be fair, the C part was just getting these additional classes ready for the next work we're going to do, right? So in my posted solution, you have them all there. If you had any problems, I did give you that little bonus gift partway through the term, partway at the beginning of the break week, that I gave you a new version of the initializer that if you created all your classes, okay, as per the instructions, then you should have no problem running the code. Now, the version I posted did not include this because you had to actually create your own triggers, but it had everything else in place to seed all the data appropriately for all the extra entities involved. So I could go through it, but you can go through it. And since we're out of time, I feel bad that I don't want to take you up. But if you have any questions about how I put the seed data here together, feel free to ask me. I did a few of the similar tricks that we had talked about earlier. For example, every fifth song gets a genre. Remember, the album must have a genre specified, but a song is optional. You would just assume naturally that it would have the same genre as the overall album, but we can change as an option the genre of a given song to something different from the genre of the album. So what I did is every 5 or so songs, I changed it to give it a random genre instead. But, it's pretty much explained in all the comments of the code. So I don't think that the C part would have given anybody any issues other than just some grunt work you had to get in place. Sorry. I've gone overtime. Any final questions from anyone? Okay. Well, that's my review of the posted solution. And as I said,